7 cent.
Throughout the history of gaming, the realm of consoles have been one of the most prominent ways for players to get their daily fix of virtual fun. Taking it back to September of 1972, the first gaming console was released in North America by name of the Magnavox Odyssey. The Magnavox Odyssey was a simple but groundbreaking piece of tech for its time. With 28 different games to be played, 2-player compatibility, and even becoming the catalyst for the invention of the light gun, this console was the start of something beautiful for video gaming fans across the world. And with the very first arcade machine being introduced just a year earlier, I'm sure the thought of taking video games to play at home had been on the minds of many adolescent youth in the early 70s. And although many great technological strides were made throughout the history of gaming consoles and their hardware, it's widely agreed upon that no range of consoles were more important than that of the 6th generation. The capabilities of the PlayStation 2, Xbox Original, and Nintendo GameCube were greatly superior to anything that had came before them. And with these consoles being able to produce open worlds, vastly improved visuals, and more realistic physics than ever before seen, it was now the job of game developers to put their imagination to the test and push the limits on what type of games they wanted to create. This creativity knew no bounds in the 6th generation and yielded many varying results. It was an ambitious time for gaming, and in this video, we're here to cover some of the most original and flat-out bizarre titles that were spawned in this era.
I told you, you gotta eat noodles, kid!
So please, put on your favorite headphones and prepare to roll one up as we dive into the most ambitious games of the early 2000s, Part 2. Trends. By definition, trends are a general direction in which something is developing or changing. Throughout our lives, we'll take notice of many generational trends and how they're ever changing. We'll often appreciate the trends of our youth the most, as it was during that time that our brains were being trained in what was deemed as cool and what was not. And if there were two things I could name that were cool as shit when I was growing up, it was incredibly oversized jeans and graffiti culture. And if you were looking for a game that had all that, well, Jet Set Radio Future was absolutely the game for you. Released in North America on February 25th of 2002, Jet Set Radio Future was a reimagined sequel of the Dreamcast game Jet Set Radio. Developed by Smilebit and published by Sega as an original Xbox launch title, JSRF was a game that brought a whole new sense of style and vibe to the world of gaming. The plot was simple. You controlled multiple members of a roller skating street gang by the name of the GGs. And throughout the game, you'll be met with the task of covering up the graffiti of other rival gangs with your own tags, as well as sticking it to the police chief of futuristic Tokyo and his clumsy army of Toy Boy soldiers. And at this time in the early 2000s, extreme sports were a really popular choice for many video game developers. The Tony Hawk series paved the way for many other extreme sports to get their shine on the many powerful consoles of the 6th generation, and rollerblading was no exception. But to be honest, the rollerblading fanbase was nowhere even close to as large as those in the skateboarding or dirt bike scene. So other than aggressive inline, there weren't really any other rollerblading games for fans of the sport to get their hands on. That is, other than Jet Set Radio for the Sega Dreamcast. Now unfortunately, the Dreamcast was a console that never really got the love it deserved, mostly due to bad timing and poor marketing. And with Jet Set Radio being a Dreamcast exclusive, it was most certainly a hidden gem that was being overlooked by many a gamer at the time. But it was only a matter of time until the world would finally feel the rails beneath their feet and get to experience this game in a whole new reimagining on the Xbox Original. And not only was this a smart move for Sega to get their fresh IP in the hands of gamers all over the world, JSRF was also paired on a dual disc with Sega GT 2002 and bundled with the Xbox Original consoles at the time. This boosted the exposure of the series, forcing Jet Set Radio Future to essentially become a staple to anyone that owned an Xbox. There really was no other experience like it at the time, and even to this day, JSRF stands in its own lane in terms of aesthetic and playstyle. Now the gameplay was simple in terms of concept, but it really provided its players with a satisfying and rewarding experience. The control and mechanics of your character were fluid, and the arcadey nature of the game really gave it an addicting replayability factor. But what was most ambitious in the realms of the Jet Set Radio series was its use of cel shading. Cel shading is essentially a rendering technique in which developers will alter the lighting in a 3D model, giving it an almost hand-drawn or comic book appearance. While there were a couple of games that had practiced this technique before JSR even existed, this series was the first to actually use cel shading for every character model and asset in their game. And as a young gamer, seeing this for the first time was an incredible experience. And even more so was how well this look appealed to the charming atmosphere of the game. These games were developed and released at the height of the Y2K era, and really showed in the way the characters and environments were designed. Oversized Jenko type jeans, funky hair colors, hip and cool dance moves. This game really had it all at the time in terms of style. And for releasing in a time when most games were very copy and paste, Jet Set Radio really stood out for its unique approach and ambitious use of cel shading in its visuals. And furthering that concept with Jet Set Radio Future, which improved upon everything in the previous game, only solidified this title as one of the most unique games to ever exist. And although JSRF was released over 21 years ago, it still holds a highly dedicated fan base. And with emulation software being so readily available nowadays, the Jet Set series is continuing to grow in following, and that's a good thing since we got a sequel coming very soon. So if you haven't had a chance to play any of the earlier titles, I'd say right now is a great time to do so. I mean, you're gonna want to brush up on your dance moves, trust me. How far would you go to save somebody you love? Well, in the case of Shadow of the Colossus and its main protagonist, we find out just that. Released in North America on October 18th of 2005 and developed by Team Ico, Shadow of the Colossus is one of the most critically acclaimed video games to ever exist in the 6th generation. Boasting stunning visuals, immersive storyline, and adrenaline-pumping battle mechanics, this game was unlike anything ever seen before, and even to this day, still remains a very original and unique experience. But before I start rambling on about how much I absolutely adore this game, how about I give y'all a little insight into the backstory. In Shadow of the Colossus, our main protagonist by the name of Wonder is on a mission to revive a mysterious girl by the name of Mono. Wonder has entered a desolate region called the Forbidden Land in search of the power needed to bring Mono back to life. He reaches an area in this region called the Shrine of Worship and is met with a mysterious voice that seems to be coming from the temple. This voice is of an entity by the name of Dorman. This entity is surprised to see Wonder and the ancient sword that he brandishes. Wonder explains to the voice his reasoning for coming to this forbidden land, in which the voice replies with a solution to his problem. He tells Wonder that he will grant his wish, but only in the case that he completes a rite that's needed to destroy the 16 idols found within the temple hall. And if he's to complete this task, then Mono will be brought back to life, but with a deadly cost. You see, in order to destroy these idols, he has to seek out the 16 different colossal beasts that are spread throughout the land and slay them one by one. And each time he kills one of these massive creatures, a part of Dorman's essence is released into Wonder's body, causing him to deteriorate over time, in which he will eventually die if his mission is completed. But to Wonder, this is a sacrifice he is more than willing to make, and so begins our journey. It's a solid but pretty straightforward concept, and the game really wastes no time throwing you straight into the action, as you'll get right to work in hunting down each colossi. The game's landscapes are vast yet minimal, and it's almost like you're in a dreamscape with how beautiful yet lonely the environments are. And in the case of this game, less really is more when it comes to the atmosphere. With a game like this being spread so thin in terms of dialogue and other characters, you really feel the weight of the loneliness in Wander's mission, as all you've got is yourself and your trusty steed by the name of Aggro. You'll spend the majority of your journey with Aggro, as he's your golden ticket for traversing these vast landscapes and your search for the 16 colossi. Upon finding each monster, you'll be tasked with tracking down their weak points, scaling the massive body of these colossus, and then stabbing them multiple times in the weak points to ultimately finish the fight. This ambitious concept for combat in a game was extremely unique for its time. In Shadow of the Colossus, each battle required a sense of strategy and overall patience to take down each foe, and this was coming at a time when most action games just consisted of button mashing and repetition. It was a beyond refreshing experience and really delivered some intense moments to get your adrenaline pumping. Each fight was more challenging than the last and gave it a very gratifying experience to scale and destroy these many diverse creatures. And while I don't want to spoil too much, keep in mind there's a reason behind the different appearance and abilities for each of the 16 Colossi. But for now, that's for me to know and you to find out. Upon release, Shadow of the Colossus was flooded with positive reception, winning several titles for its game and art design. It was also given one of the 3 Innovation Awards at the 2006 Game Developers' Choice Awards. And due to its widespread love from gamers across the globe, a new fully remastered version of Shadow of the Colossus was released on February 6th of 2018 for the PlayStation 4, which in my honest opinion is the best way to experience this game due to its improved visuals and much more modern control scheme. Overall, Shadow of the Colossus is a testament to how incredible a game can be when you aren't afraid to take a couple chances and do things a little different than usual. And that's fitting for a game that's about sacrifice. As much as I could go into detail about so many other incredible moments in this game, I leave that for you, the player, to find out. But just know, everything comes with a price.
Hello, motherfucker.
If there was one artist who really made their mark on the early 2000s, it was Curtis Jackson, also known as 50 Cent. 50 Cent was one of the most successful rappers of his generation, with an extensive catalog of hit singles as well as his debut and sophomore albums both holding #1 spots on the music charts for multiple weeks. It was safe to say that 50 was doing very well for himself, and this success brought upon many financial endeavors throughout his career. From signing a very lucrative deal with Vitamin Water, to creating his own vodka line, writing multiple bestseller books, and even having a shoe deal with Reebok, the man was literally made of money, which made his name all the more fitting when you think about it. It was almost as if he could do no wrong. Well, that was up until he decided to star in his very own video game called 50 Cent Bulletproof. 50 Cent Bulletproof was an action game that felt more like a fever dream than anything else. While the game obviously had such an over-the-top story that it couldn't be seen as anything other than absurd, 50 claimed the story was based on his own experience about the infamous night in which he was shot 9 times. The story starts with 50 receiving a call from his longtime friend by the name of K-Dog. K-Dog is in a bit of trouble and is in need of 50 to come bail him out. But K-Dog is a lot more jammed up than we expected when we see him being beaten by a militarized group of masked men. In turn, this begins a shooting rampage throughout the many rooftops and alleyways of Queens, New York, ending with 50 being shot 9 times and left for dead. 50 then wakes up in the dangerously unsanitary apartment of Doc Friday, a former doctor who was apparently fired for his love of cocaine. Doc has treated 50 for his bullet wounds and dumps a few painkillers in him to recover. While 50 eventually recovers and then sets out on his journey to seek out those who wanted him dead, it's pretty much the kind of story you would expect in a 50 Cent game. But to be honest, it's pretty entertaining for the most part. Although it was a bit disconnected from reality, there's really no harm in seeing 50 in this light, as he really was one of the toughest rappers of this era. Not to mention, we also have an entire cast of other artists who befriend and even squad up with 50 on his quest for revenge. G-Unit, the rap group that 50 belonged to, is also his entourage in the game, meaning you'll spend many countless missions gunning through waves of enemies alongside Lloyd Banks, Tony Yayo, and Young Buck. Eminem also makes his appearance in the game, working as a corrupt cop who teams up with 50 to uncover the many secrets behind his assassination attempt. And with this much bullet-soaked combat, we're gonna need a lot of heat. And would you look at that? It looks like Dr. Dre has got our back, as an arms dealer by the name of Grizz. Now, you're probably wondering why on earth I would include such a game of goofball magnitude on my list. Well, let me take a moment to explain myself. You see, prior to the game's release, 50 had stated in an interview that he felt as if Bulletproof was going to be the most exciting game of 2005. And for that to be the same year that both God of War and Resident Evil were released, he definitely must have had some serious heat under his belt, right? And while I do claim to be somewhat of a huge 50 Cent fanboy, it comes with great displeasure for me to say that this game was a massive stinker. While the majority of your playthrough will be spent killing wave after wave of brain dead enemies that just seemingly spawn out of the sky, it really does get repetitive. And you know, I'm all for a good run and gun formula, but how can you expect me to enjoy this game when it makes me clench my butt cheeks every time I attempt to aim? I mean, I really can't put in the words how impossibly unresponsive the aiming is in this game. I really just gave up about halfway through my playthrough and stopped using my right stick entirely eventually, as it was more effective for me to just walk into my target rather than aim at them. While this game did manage to make use of a cover system, which was decently unique for its time, it was also extremely unresponsive. It felt more like you were stuck in some type of glue trap. The dialogue was cringeworthy and highly stereotypical, almost as if it was written by a group of overprivileged 9th graders who tried their best to be as edgy and gangsta as possible.
Is money the only thing that matters to you?
That's pretty funny coming from a guy who calls himself 50 Cent.
It was a laughable mess of a game if I'm totally honest, but I'd be lying to say that I didn't enjoy the ride. As much as the game was frustrating, it still had a very nostalgic charm about it and really kept me glued to my screen for an entire playthrough. And although I may be biased as I'm a big fan of 50, I feel that the developers of Bulletproof, i.e. Genuine Games, really did put a lot of hard work and love behind this project. Not to mention, even 50 himself was very involved in the production and writing of this game. But it's hard to say whether this really was a passion project or just another lucrative business venture for Mr. Jackson. And with 50 Cent Bulletproof selling over 1.1 million copies across the globe, it looked as though the latter was a job well done. While it didn't deliver any groundbreaking mechanics or a storyline to be remembered for decades to come, 50 Cent Bulletproof was still ambitious in the fact that they were able to take one of hip-hop's biggest stars and turn him into one of gaming's most ridiculous action heroes of the early 2000s. With Bulletproof being so absurd in practice, it was no surprise that the critical masses were deeming the game to be mediocre at best. And while I can't exactly say this game was good, I still think it's worth a playthrough after all these years. But just don't forget your vest, because that's the only thing bulletproof at 50 Cent Bulletproof. Imagine yourself in a town so familiar, yet so distant from your memories. The fog is thick, and an ominous silence is cascading through each empty street you cautiously travel through. Against your better judgment, you keep walking, only to find yourself lost and helpless to whatever it may be that's lurking in the shadows. Throughout the years of gaming, we've had a fair share of many different horror-based titles. With the success of the Resident Evil series and its innovation in the genre of survival horror, many developers were looking to provide an equally unsettling gaming experience in their own creations. With multiple different series such as Alone in the Dark and Clock Tower seeing positive reception in the late 90s, it seemed as though the horror fandom had an insatiable thirst for their next big scare. And while these games were suspenseful and innovative in their own way, none of them could even attempt to compete with the depth of which Silent Hill on the PlayStation 1 was best known for. While most games were focused on scaring their players with jumpy cutscenes and loud sound effects, Silent Hill 2 was much more of a slow-burning experience, built to immerse you in its world and leave you with the ominous dread that's found within. And with the release of the 6th generation of consoles, it was clear to Konami and a small group of developers by the name of Team Silent that it was their time to bring the world of Silent Hill into the new generation, and release a title that would continue to shock the world of gaming, even to this day. That game was Silent Hill 2. Released on September 25th of 2001, Silent Hill 2 centers on our main protagonist James Sunderland. James is a widower who has traveled to Silent Hill in search of answers after receiving a mysterious letter written by his late wife, Mary. In this letter, Mary reminisces on the good times they had spent together in Silent Hill and tells James that she's there waiting for him. Although James is in disbelief at these claims, as she was believed to have died 3 years earlier. But something inside of James can't let this letter go, so he finds himself in this mysterious town once more, searching for answers. Now, upon entering the desolate streets of Silent Hill, you can already tell that something is indeed very wrong with this town. A thick fog surrounds you as you traverse each broken road and every building empty yet full of clues. You'll find yourself doing a lot of exploring throughout liminal spaces and slowly piecing together the mystery that has consumed our main protagonist. It's a tale that's not only terrifying but also incredibly unsettling, as you come to meet other people who are also lost in this very same town. As much as I try to keep these entries spoiler free, it's safe to say that every character in this game has been carefully thought out, and every detail within its story has a purpose that will come full circle. Now in terms of story, Silent Hill 2 really does spin a unique web that is both thought-provoking and nausea-inducing. But how about its gameplay? Well, in short, it plays like most late 90s to early 2000s horror titles. The game's use of tank controls gives James an incredibly vulnerable feel to him, as this control scheme is not as snappy as the modern controls we're used to in present time. But much like in the Resident Evil series, this control scheme is very much welcomed and really adds to the intensity of the game when it matters most. With most tank control games of this time also making use of fixed camera angles, it came as a relief that Silent Hill 2 made use of a dynamic camera, and this was actually a technique that was pioneered a year earlier with Resident Evil Code Veronica. You also spend the majority of the game piecing together clues and solving some pretty tough puzzles, but don't forget about that R2 button, because it's going to get plenty of use. Throughout the story of Silent Hill 2, you run across many different creatures, all of which are incredibly aggressive, and have no restraint in trying to eat your face off. Luckily, the combat system is pretty well designed for this game, without being too over or underwhelming. It gives a perfect balance of helpless and trained in James' fighting skill. Much like many other survival horror titles, ammo is usually very scarce, so you'll have to depend on the use of melee weapons, or just avoiding your enemy completely in certain circumstances. And combining this sense of danger throughout the game with the disturbing backstory that's viciously unfolding around you, you've got yourself one hell of an experience. Now, it's no debate that Silent Hill 2 is one of the most widely appreciated games to ever exist. But what was so ambitious about it? Well, in short, it was in the execution of its horror. You see, in Silent Hill 2, the game will not shock or scare you in the way that most horror games will. This is a story that really sinks its claws into you and doesn't let go until you're literally crying at the end credits, which was my personal experience, by the way. These games aren't just about horror, it's about real-life consequence and the depth in which our minds can sink in the presence of grief and long-term trauma. Each character has a story and purpose, and even the little details in most environments you travel to will have some type of connection to the story of James Sunderland and the multiple other visitors to Silent Hill as well. Each enemy you face represents a piece of each character and really brings the term of fighting your demons to a new light. Overall, Silent Hill 2 was a game that was either going to completely tank or be as legendary as it luckily was. With incredible characters and lore, an irresistible discomfort, and some of the best music in a gaming soundtrack, Silent Hill 2 is not only one of the best horror titles, but one of the best games of all time, period. So if you think you have what it takes to uncover the many mysteries of Silent Hill and its inhabitants, I strongly commend you to do so. Just don't forget your flashlight, because you're definitely going to be needing it. That's a lot of talking. So there we have it. Some of the most ambitious games of the early 2000s, part dos. Hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please leave a comment down below. Let me know what games I should cover in my next video. Also, just want to thank all the new subscribers to the channel. We're almost to 1,000 subs, and I really can't thank you guys enough for all your support and all the kind messages you've been sending me lately, so thank you. But until next time, my name is Vincent. I hope to see you in the next video. Stay safe and stay blessed. Peace.
Heaven sent.